The sun was shining, kids were riding bikes, and all seemed well in the neighborhood. But there was one little problem, one very big problem. You see, I had a problem. A problem with my homeowners association HOA. Specifically with one member of that HOA, whom I'll refer to as Karen. The thing is, I've always had a love for unique art and quirky decorations. When I moved into my house a couple of years ago, I knew I wanted to do something bold. That's when I decided to install a giant dog statue in my front yard. It wasn't just any dog statue. It was a massive, imposing creature, standing on two paws, looking straight ahead with its tongue lolling out and its tail curled in an almost comical way. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a neighborhood full of perfectly manicured gardens and pristine lawns. I loved it. It added character, and it made me smile every time I came home. But apparently, not everyone shared my enthusiasm. The HOA had always been a bit of a headache, but for the most part, they left me alone. Until one fateful day when I found a letter slipped under my front door. It was from the HOA, and it was about the dog statue. The letter stated, "We have received several complaints from your neighbors regarding the size and placement of your dog statue. It is not in compliance with HOA guidelines. You are requested to remove it immediately." I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. A giant dog statue. Really? What was the issue? Was it too big? Too quirky? Was it somehow ruining the delicate aesthetic of the neighborhood? I thought about all the perfectly boring houses around me and their perfectly boring lawns. Maybe my dog statue was a bit too much for the vanilla crowd, but I wasn't going to let a little thing like an HOA let it ruin my fun. I decided to stand my ground. I would not be bullied into taking down my statue. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to remove the dog statue. I was going to transform it, but I had to do it in a way that would leave everyone speechless. Little did Karen and the HOA know, they had just unknowingly set the stage for my masterpiece. I started brainstorming. How could I make this situation work in my favor? How could I keep my beloved dog statue while also sending a message to the HOA and, in particular, to Karen? Then it hit me. What if I painted the statue? But not just any paint job. No, I would paint the dog statue to look like Karen herself. The idea was perfect. It would be a subtle, yet very obvious, jab at her, while still complying with the HOA's request. After all, I wasn't technically removing the statue, right? I was just redecorating it. I ran to the hardware store, loaded up on supplies, and went to work. The transformation would be spectacular. The dog statue, which had once been a simple canine figure, would soon have Karen's face. It took hours to get the details right. I started with the skin tone, a pale beige, matching Karen's complexion as closely as possible. Next, I added the hair, a fine layer of golden highlights, just like Karen's blonde, overprocessed locks. I paid special attention to the expression on the dog's face. Karen always had this specific look, like she was constantly in judgment of everyone around her. So, I painted that too. The pursed lips, the disapproving eyes, and that signature nose wrinkle. But I didn't stop there. I added a touch of drama by painting an oversized pair of sunglasses on the dog's face, just like the ones Karen would always wear when walking around the neighborhood. I even added a little necklace around the statue's neck, something tasteful but eye-catching, much like Karen's favorite pieces. By the time I was done, it wasn't just a statue of a dog anymore. It was a larger-than-life caricature of the very woman who had demanded its removal. It was Karen the dog statue. I couldn't wait to see her face when she saw it. I knew it was only a matter of time before she came around to check on the status of my compliance. Days passed, and nothing happened. I figured the HOA had either given up on their demands or, more likely, were too shocked by the transformation to even know how to respond. But then, one day, I was sitting in my living room, sipping coffee, when I saw her. Karen strutted down the street, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. She slowed as she passed my house, and her eyes locked on the statue. Her body tensed, her lips parted slightly, and she let out an audible gasp. It was the exact reaction I had been hoping for. I watched from the window, barely containing my laughter, as she approached the statue. She circled it, inspecting every detail. At first, she seemed confused, as if she didn't know whether to be angry or impressed. But the longer she stood there, the more her face twisted into a mask of disbelief. Eventually, she pulled out her phone and began snapping pictures. I figured she was either planning to send them to the HOA or post them on social media. But either way, I was curious about what she'd do next. It didn't take long before she marched up to my front door, her face red with frustration. I opened the door and greeted her with a friendly smile, as if I hadn't just painted a giant statue of her in my front yard. "Well," she started, "what do you think you're doing? You're still in violation of HOA guidelines. You've altered the statue, and I don't know what you think you're trying to prove, but this is unacceptable." I could hardly keep a straight face. "Karen, I don't understand. I did remove the statue. It's just a different version now. I thought it would comply with your wishes." Her eyes widened, and she fumbled with her words. This isn't a joke, you know. You can't just paint it like that. What are people going to think?" I shrugged casually. "Well, I think they'll find it pretty amusing. A little bit of humor never hurt anyone, right?" The next few days were a whirlwind. Karen, furious, took her complaints to the HOA once again. They called a meeting to discuss the situation, and I was invited to attend. I showed up, ready to defend my decision. When it was my turn to speak, I stood confidently in front of the HOA board. "I didn't break any rules," I explained. "I didn't remove the statue. I just gave it a bit of a makeover. And honestly, I think it looks fantastic." The room was dead silent. Karen, sitting in the corner, looked like she might explode. But then, unexpectedly, one of the board members spoke up. "Honestly," he said, "I think it's pretty clever. It's certainly unique. Maybe we should loosen up the rules a bit." Karen's face went white. She couldn't believe it. The HOA was defending my statue. After a tense few moments, the HOA voted on the matter. To Karen's utter disbelief, they decided that my statue was fine the way it was. There was no rule that explicitly forbade painting sculptures in the neighborhood, and as long as it was on my property, it was my choice. Karen left the meeting fuming, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Not only had I saved my statue, but I had also managed to turn the tables on her in the most satisfying way possible. In the end, Karen never quite got over the transformation of the dog statue. I saw her drive by a few times, her eyes darting nervously toward the front yard, but she never mentioned it again. The HOA, surprisingly, didn't mind the playful art in the neighborhood, and some of the neighbors even started stopping by to take pictures with the statue. As for me, I had a good laugh, and I think I learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the power of creativity and humor, especially when dealing with the likes of Karen. The days that followed were oddly quiet. Karen's usual patrols around the neighborhood slowed down. I figured it was because she was too angry to face the reality of what had happened. Or maybe she was plotting some new, elaborate way to get back at me. But whatever it was, I was still on edge. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation. After all, I had already crossed the line in ways she could never have imagined. Then, one morning, as I was sipping my coffee on the porch, I saw Karen walking down the street again. But this time, she wasn't alone. To my surprise, she was with two other HOA members. They were laughing, chatting, until they saw the statue. Their conversation immediately dropped off, and they slowed to a stop. I couldn't hear what they were saying from my porch, but I could see them exchanging glances, trying to stifle their reactions. I noticed Karen's hand twitch toward her phone. This wasn't good. She was documenting something. Maybe she was gearing up for another round of complaints, or perhaps she was planning to show the whole neighborhood how I had disrespected the HOA's rules. But as they stood there, I realized something. They weren't disgusted by the statue. In fact, they seemed intrigued. Karen, who had once been so fiercely against the statue, seemed unsure about how to respond. Was she mad? Was she defeated? Or was she just surprised by how far I had taken it? That's when one of the HOA members, the one who had been silent the entire time, looked at Karen and said something that made her jaw drop. He said, "You know, Karen, I actually think this adds character to the neighborhood. It's different. A little bold, maybe, but not in a bad way. People will talk about it for sure." That was it. That single comment was all it took to deflate Karen's argument. She looked flustered, her face flushing red. But this time, There was no anger in her eyes. There was just defeat. But Karen wasn't one to let things go that easily. I watched her walk away. Her shoulders slumped. But I knew this wasn't the end. She'd find a way to turn the tables. It was just a matter of when. The next few days passed without incident. I almost started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had finally won the battle. The statue became something of a conversation starter. Neighbors I'd never even spoken to before came over to take pictures, some even complimenting my sense of humor. I began to feel like I had somehow become a local legend. But deep down, I knew the calm wouldn't last forever. Something was coming, and I wasn't entirely sure what it was. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. Sure enough, a few days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was even more formal than the last, and it was signed by Karen. She was now the one leading the charge against the dog statue. Reading the letter, I found myself shaking my head in disbelief. She was claiming that the statue was causing a disruption in the neighborhood. She stated that it was now a public nuisance, and that it didn't fit the charm and class of the community. There were mentions of it being an eyesore and a blight on the property values. But what really caught me off guard was her demand. I had to remove the statue or face legal action. That was a new one. I sat there for a moment, processing the letter. Was Karen really taking things this far? It seemed ridiculous, almost absurd. Legal action? Over a statue? A painted dog statue? My first instinct was to laugh, but then I remembered I was dealing with someone who would go to any lengths to make sure things went her way. And that meant I had to be careful. That night, I sat down and thought things through. What could I do? The HOA could technically enforce whatever rules they wanted, but could they really make me remove the statue? I wasn't just going to back down again, not without a fight. So, I decided to do something unexpected. Something that would not only protect my dog statue, but send Karen a message she would never forget. The next morning, I went to the hardware store again. This time, I wasn't buying paint. No, I had something more strategic in mind. I returned with a huge tarp, a couple of new cans of paint, and the determination to turn things up a notch. I had a plan, one that would make Karen regret ever trying to challenge me. This wasn't about just fighting back. This was about proving a point. The tarp went over the statue, completely covering it. Karen, for all her might, had no idea what was coming. And when she came to check the statue, she would find not just the same dog statue she hated. No, she would find a new, improved version. One that would force her to reconsider her next move. Days later, as I stood on my front porch, I saw Karen walking up the street again. This time, she was alone. No HOA members by her side. She stopped in front of my house and stared at the covered statue. I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't know what to think. This was it. This was the moment where everything would either collapse or come together. I waited, and then Karen made her move. She walked up to my front door and knocked. I smiled to myself as I opened the door. Here it came. "Why is the statue covered?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I think you'll find that it's not what you expect," I said, enjoying every second of the moment. Karen's eyebrows furrowed. She stepped back, eyeing me suspiciously. "What do you mean?" "I think it's time for a change," I said casually. Without another word, I pulled off the tarp. And there it was. The giant dog statue, but now with a twist. I had transformed it into something completely new. Something even more outrageous than before. The dog was still there, of course. But now, instead of Karen's face, I had given it a new character. Her character. But this time with an added layer of humor. I had painted the statue wearing a tutu, with a fake mustache and holding a tiny umbrella. Karen froze, speechless. She couldn't even speak. I had taken her complaint, her request to remove the statue, and turned it into something even more ridiculous. The very thing she hated was now the object of everyone's amusement. And from that moment on, Karen couldn't do anything to stop it. The neighborhood had officially chosen sides. The statue had become part of the community's personality, a symbol of humor and rebellion against unnecessary rules. And no matter how much Karen raged, she couldn't change it. The HOA never came back to challenge me, and the statue remained exactly where it was. But I knew that even if they did, I would have a whole new arsenal of ridiculousness at my disposal. And the best part? Karen could never take it away. The dog statue became a legend, a local monument that, years later, would still be talked about whenever someone mentioned the neighborhood. It wasn't just a statue anymore. It was a symbol of resistance, of standing up for what you believe in, no matter how silly it seemed. And every time I saw that statue, I couldn't help but smile. Let Karen try to stop me. She was no match for the power of creativity and a little bit of paint. The statue stood proudly in my front yard, now transformed into an icon of defiance and humor. But as time passed, the initial excitement of Karen's defeat started to fade, and I began to wonder, what was next? Sure, Karen had been beaten at her own game, but now the HOA seemed to be in a weird limbo. They didn't know what to do with me or my statue. They hadn't tried to push any further, but I could feel that something was brewing beneath the surface. The next few weeks felt oddly peaceful. Karen still drove by from time to time, but her face had lost the usual red hue of fury. She'd slowed down, but she no longer gave me those angry glares. I began to wonder if I had finally broken her spirit. Maybe she realized that she'd never get her way with me. But then came an unexpected twist. One Saturday morning, as I was tending to the garden, I noticed a familiar figure walking up the sidewalk. This time, it wasn't Karen. It was another neighbor, a man I'd never spoken to before, carrying a large cardboard box. He waved at me as he approached. "Hey, I've got something for you," he said, setting the box down on my porch. I blinked, confused. "What's this?" The man grinned. "I think it's time you added a little more flair to your statue. It's not complete without this." I opened the box, and inside was a small, intricately designed top hat and a monocle. I burst out laughing. I had no idea who this man was or how he knew what I was thinking, but this unexpected gift made my day. He waved goodbye and walked back down the street, leaving me standing there, holding the ridiculous additions to my already absurd statue. Without a second thought, I took the hat and monocle and carefully placed them on the dog statue. I took a step back to admire my work. Now the dog was not only in a tutu with a fake mustache, but it also looked like a high society canine with a refined taste in accessories. The best part? Karen drove by right then. She slowed as usual, her eyes locking on the statue. But this time, her face went blank. For a moment, I wondered if she was actually speechless. Then, she rolled down her window, leaned out, and shouted, "You're really going to take this too far, aren't you?" I smiled and waved. "Oh, Karen, you have no idea. I'm just getting started." That's when things started to get interesting. I noticed that more and more neighbors were starting to stop by. Some brought small additions for the statue. A bow tie here, a tiny bouquet of flowers there. Others just came to take pictures and laugh. My front yard, which had once been a dull patch of grass, was now a hot spot. People were coming from all over the neighborhood, and slowly, the legend of the statue started to grow. Every day, there was something new to add to the dog. One neighbor even put a little toy dog beside it, as if to say, "This is the real dog now." And it wasn't just kids. Adults were getting in on the act, too. One evening, I saw a man in a business suit place a miniature umbrella on the statue's head. "For shade," he said, smiling, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Even Karen started to show signs of frustration again. I saw her pull up across the street and sit in her car, watching the ever-evolving statue. I couldn't help but wonder what was going through her head. Was she secretly pleased with the way the community had embraced my rebellion? Or was she seething with jealousy, wishing she could have controlled the situation from the start? I knew she was plotting something. It was only a matter of time before she'd try to bring the HOA back into the picture. But for now, I was enjoying the spotlight. My dog statue had become a community project, something that people of all ages enjoyed. It had turned into something more than just a prank. It was a symbol of neighborhood unity. That's when I started to get a strange idea. If the HOA couldn't remove my statue, why not push it even further? Maybe it was time to take the community involvement to the next level. What if I could make it interactive? What if I could invite the entire neighborhood to add something personal to the statue, like a time capsule of sorts? The more I thought about it, the more the idea grew on me. This wasn't just about defying Karen anymore. This was about creating something permanent, A piece of art that everyone could take pride in. Something that would tell the story of our neighborhood for years to come. I began putting up flyers around the neighborhood. "The Great Dog Statue Transformation," they read. "Come add your touch to the most unique piece of art in town. Leave your mark on the community." At first, I wasn't sure how people would respond. But to my delight, the response was overwhelming. More and more neighbors came to join in. Some brought tiny hats. Some brought painted rocks to decorate the statue's base. A few even brought small notes with funny messages that they tucked into the dog's tutu. It wasn't long before the dog statue became more than just an eyesore for Karen. It was a collective effort, a community project that was larger than any one person. People from all walks of life began showing up, contributing their own creativity and laughter. What had started as a defiant act against an HOA request had now transformed into something even more powerful, a testament to the strength of a neighborhood that refused to conform. But then, of course, Karen showed up. One chilly evening, as I was adding a new set of tiny sunglasses to the statue's face, I saw Karen pull up once more. This time, though, there was something different about her. Her posture was straighter, and her expression was more controlled. She walked toward the statue with a purpose. I braced myself for another confrontation, but what happened next caught me completely off guard. Karen stood in front of the statue for several minutes, her eyes scanning every detail. For the first time, I didn't see the fury in her eyes. Instead, I saw a smirk. It was subtle, but it was there. "You know," she said slowly, "this is definitely one of the strangest things I've ever seen." She glanced over at me, her voice a little softer than usual. "But I have to admit, it's kind of creative. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you've actually made it kind of fun." I stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Had Karen just complimented my statue? Was this the same woman who had nearly sent me to court over it? Before I could say anything, Karen took a deep breath, her eyes still on the statue. "I guess I could learn to appreciate this," she added with an almost hesitant shrug. And for the first time, I didn't feel the tension I usually felt when Karen was around. Instead, I felt a little victorious. But deep down, I knew the game wasn't over. Karen wasn't one to back down easily. She might have softened, but that didn't mean she was done with me yet. I still had to stay on my toes. After all, the statue had become more than just a symbol of rebellion. It had become something that everyone had a stake in. And I had a feeling that Karen, no matter how she played this, would want to make her mark. I watched Karen as she stood there, staring at the statue with that strange expression. She had softened, yes, but I couldn't quite figure out where this was going. Was she accepting defeat? Or was this just a temporary truce before the next battle? "I'll admit, it's definitely unique," she said finally, almost reluctantly. "But I still don't think it belongs here." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's already here, Karen. And as much as you don't like it, it's become part of the neighborhood now. People love it. People come here just to see it." She sighed deeply, folding her arms across her chest. "You're right, it's become some sort of tourist attraction. But that doesn't mean it's right." "Maybe what's right is up for interpretation," I said with a shrug. "Maybe we're all allowed to enjoy things a little differently. Sometimes it's the things that make us uncomfortable that end up bringing us closer together." Karen just stared at the statue again, her lips pressed together in a tight line. I could see her thinking, weighing her options. For once, she wasn't angry. She was pensive. It was a shift I wasn't sure how to handle.